Hi everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IAS in English. My name is Bhanwar Singh from India 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012. And I welcome you onto the platform and I hope that you are doing good. And ultimately, once again, we'll be doing the complete Hindu analysis. We'll be seeing which all important articles are there in our today's The Hindu. And then we'll be seeing why they are important and which all things we have to remember from the perspective of the examination. And that is what we are going to do today in our today's The Hindu session. All right. So if you are live, please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live. And we have over here, I'm sorry, I cannot read your name, Preeti. Good morning. All right. So over here, we'll be doing the complete The Hindu analysis and we'll be seeing which all important articles are there in our today's The Hindu that actually we need to go through for our complete preparation for the civil services. All right, so let's start the session and let's see that which all important articles are there. But before that, let me tell you that you can, you can download the PDF, the complete PDF that will be available on the Telegram channel that is there in front of you. You can scan the code or also you can search for me on my channel at the rate Bhanwar_StudyIQ. Now, these are the important articles or the themes that we'll be covering today. The first one is about the Supreme Court, which have restricted the retrospective or ex post facto environmental clearances. Now, this is again quite important because this topic clearly it links your GS paper 3 because this is related to the environment and also it relates to the GS 2 as well because this is about Supreme Court as well, which have regulated or you can say restricted the ex post facto environmental clearances. Now then, the second thing that we'll be talking about is the editorial that is there. A complete editorial that is in the today's Hindu, and this is where we are talking about the FCRA amendment bill that had been tabled or that will be tabled in the parliament in 2026, which will regulate the NGOs. Now, this is quite important because you will see that when it comes to the civil society organizations or the civil society, so there are the government which are actually restricting or they are basically you can say that they are moving towards controlling the civil society organizations, and that is why this is quite important and it pertains to GS paper 2. Then we'll be talking about India's theatre command reform and the military readiness as well. This is also the editorial that we'll be discussing. And again, it is quite important because when it comes to the theatre command, it is where we have all the three forces that will be, they will be moving ahead or they will be acting together for any of the threat that will be there from the northern frontiers that we have. All right. So that is again another important article that we'll be discussing today. Then the next news is about the India which have abstained from the ILO Convention 193, that is about the gig or the platform workers. Now this is quite important because you must have seen that already when it comes to UPSC, so in the prelims we had found that such type of questions had been asked recently. So again this becomes important that India have abstained from the ILO Convention 193. Then the next news that we'll be discussing about is the private industry which have overtaken the government in the research and development spending that pertains to the research and development or you can say the science and technology that is the part of the GS paper 3. Then we'll be talking about the China's open weight AI diplomacy and the compute constraints as well, which is again it is important because this relates to international relation and this also relates to the GS paper 3, that is the technology or the AI that we are talking about right now. So this is the major technology that we are talking about. Then we are talking about the US Senate fast tracks the 100% tariff act on the Russian oil buyers. Now this pertains to India because India has jumped up its oil share when it comes to the crude oil that we are importing from Russia. So therefore this is quite important. Then we'll be talking about the BRICS Summit 2026 as well, where the Xi and the Putin they will visit amid the US tariff push on the Russian oil. So again these are the important themes or you can say the articles that we'll be discussing for today. But before that, let's see that what is the word for the day. It is punctilio. That is basically a fine point of etiquette or petty formality. So the synonyms are that it is formal or decorous or correct and nice, and the usage that has been given is that every punctilio of the ceremony was observed. All right. So let's move to the first news that we are discussing today, and this is about the Supreme Court that actually restricts the retrospective environmental clearances. Now this is quite important because ultimately what had happened was that the Supreme Court, in a bench that was headed by the Chief Justice of India, Suryakant, the bench, it has quashed with prospective effect the 2021 Office Memorandum or OM that have allowed the ex post facto environmental clearances for the projects which have begun without the prior clearances. Now over here the court have held that the centre, it cannot substantially alter the protective environmental checks which are there through just mere administrative instructions, and only a proper amnesty in notification for a finite and the exceptional class of the projects, it is permissible under the Environmental Protection Act that was laid down by the Supreme Court. Now this is quite important because in 2021 there was a OM or the Office Memorandum that was actually released by the Environmental Ministry or the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which have said that there will be the clearances that will be given ex post facto. And over here, this had been quashed by the Supreme Court, and this had been quashed only prospectively. That is the clearances which have already been granted under it and under the 2017 OM or the Office Memorandum, which was basically the one-time amnesty, they stay valid unless individually challenged. So, ongoing projects which are worth the thousands of the crores, like for example, we have AIIMS Odisha, we also have the Vijaypura Airport and the slum rehabilitation or the irrigation projects, they will not be upset or they will not be, touched upon by this recent Supreme Court judgment. Now, you must be thinking that why the Supreme Court have allowed these projects to move forward. So basically, there is a lot of investment that has been done, and already if there would be any kind of stopping of these projects in between, so that will have the adverse impact on the complete scenario. Now, over here, this has also been important because ultimately, you can see that there had been a division bench judgment which have called the retrospective environmental clearances gross illegality in 2025 or May 2025, and thereby the larger bench that was there, it had diluted this in November 2025, citing that there would be a devastating effect on the public projects which are there. And now when we are talking about the Supreme Court judgment recently, it restores the stricter position when it comes to the environmental clearances going forward. And that is why we, you can remember this through the PDE. All right, you can remember this through PDE, that is that when it comes to the clearances, so of course there has to be the prior clearances that must be given. All right, that was what the Supreme Court said, that there should be the prior clearances that must be given for any of the project, and that must not be diluted by just the office memorandum. And even when it comes to the delegated legislation, all right, so office memorandum is where we have the delegated legislation. So it has said that the delegated legislation, it cannot be, or you can say that it cannot be directed by the executive. That is what it cannot be directed by executive. So that is what you have to remember when it comes to the complete perspective, because over here the Supreme Court have clearly said that if there is any kind of office memorandum that had been passed, so that is in violation of the act that had been laid down, or the Environmental Protection Act that we are talking about. And thereby this is quite important, and ultimately over here you can see that the Environmental Impact Assessment Notification 2006, it was issued under the Section 3 of the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. And this actually makes that there must be prior environmental clearance that must be taken, or it is mandatory before the construction or the operation of the listed categories, whether it is mining projects, whether it is the infrastructure projects, the industry or the townships. So there must be the mandatory environmental clearance that must be taken. Now, when it comes to the complete perspective, so what had happened was that there were the environmental clearances that were given. Now, these environmental clearances, they were given ex post facto after the project have already started and or it was complete. Now, this was actually first introduced through the one-time amnesty that was given in 2017, but then it was made a standing route through the 2021 office memorandum. And that is why this complete issue where it revolves, that the 2017 one-time amnesty was just a kind of, you can say that it was an exception. But in the 2021, the ex post facto clearances, they were actually, they were made a kind of routine exercise, and that is why Supreme Court have over here quashed the 2021 OM and even the 2017 one-time amnesty as well. Now over here at the same time, the Supreme Court have let down that actually this does not takes away the power that the Supreme Court have under Article 142. Now this is quite important because Article 142 provides the special powers, or you can say the special rights to the Supreme Court, where actually the Supreme Court is basically, it can be, or the powers can be invoked for doing the complete justice, and Supreme Court have noted over here that it retains its own plenary power to grant the ex posto relief in exceptional cases, and this can be only the executive route through the administrative OM that has basically been quashed, or it has been barred by the Supreme Court. So over here, this pertains to the administrative law as well, because we talk about the delegated legislation when it comes to public administration. So this is quite important, because here what had happened was the Supreme Court have said that you cannot, you cannot move ahead, and through the executive order, you cannot actually say that there is the prior approval that is not necessary, because ultimately that is against the the spirit of the notification that was passed in 2006 that mandated that there must be prior environmental clearances that must be given. So this is quite important when it comes to the complete perspective or the environmental justice as well. So here you can understand this complete perspective from this particular scenario, that there is the statutory baseline, and this statutory baseline is the 2006 Environmental Impact Assessment Notification that actually lays down that there must be the prior environmental clearances that must be taken, and this is a mandatory legal requirement. This is not something that is that is a choice that is with the with the infrastructure projects that had to be built. So this is a mandatory legal requirement that is before the project construction that must begin. Now over here, there was the executive deviation that we had seen, and it was in 2017 first, and then later on in 2021, which actually provides through the office memorandum. It was actually not the notification, but just the executive order or the office memorandum that provided that there could be a perpetual route to regularize the projects operating without the prior clearance as well. Now this goes just against the notification that was laid down in 2006. And ultimately, when it comes to the legal challenge, so this environmental petitions or the petitioners, they challenged this OM in the Supreme Court, argued that administrative instructions, they cannot alter the delegated legislation. All right, and that is why what I was saying about that this is about administrative law, this is about the delegated legislation as well. And here the judicial ruling was that ultimately this 2021 OM had been invalidated prospectively. Prospectively, that means that moving forward, all right, those of the projects which have already been granted the clearances, they will not be impacted. All right, and the ruling that the executive orders, they cannot supplant the delegated legislation. That is what had been laid down by the Supreme Court, and here it had maintained the constitutional balance as well, where actually the court have said that it has the power that is there under Article 142 that it can use to protect the existing project utility projects which had been cleared under the previous order, while barring the routine ex post clearances that had been given or that will be given moving forward. So in future, there cannot be ex post facto clearances in the terms of the environmental impact assessment. But at the same time, when it comes to the perspective, so all the projects which had been cleared before, they will continue moving forward as per the powers that the Supreme Court have under Article 142. Now, the next article is basically, it is the editorial that we are talking about, written by PDT Achari, who is former Secretary General of Lok Sabha. Now, this is about the FCRA amendment bill that will be tabled in the parliament. Now, FCRA amendment bill, or the, when it comes to the foreign contribution regulations, act that is there. So ultimately that will tighten the screws on the NGOs or the civil society that we are talking about. Now this is quite important because the FCRA Amendment Bill 2026, it will be for the consideration in the monsoon session after being postponed the last time or the last session where there were the protests from the Christian organizations and even the NGOs related to the proposed amendments that will be brought by this FCRA Amendment Act. Now, when it comes to the FCRA Amendment Act or the bill, it will actually empower the government to vest all the assets of the NGO, even those which are only partly funded by the foreign contribution. Remember this. Alright, so all the assets of the NGO, even if they are partly funded by the foreign contribution, they will be vested in the designated authority that had been said by the bill once the FCRA certificate it has been cancelled. And even earlier, this was only on the provisional basis, and thereby this is the act that will actually tighten its ropes on the NGOs that are functioning in India. And we have already seen before that there had been a notification that had been passed by the Ministry of Home Affairs where it has said the NGOs, they have to register themselves into their respective categories as well. So this is where we are talking about where the governments, they are moving ahead and they are tightening the rope over the NGOs or the civil society as well. Now this is quite important because ultimately the cancellation, it can also follow the mere prosecution or even a police station complaint alleging forcible religious conversion as well without the conviction. Sorry. All right. So this is quite important when it comes to the complete perspective that it is without the conviction that there could be the cancellation that could be done of the NGO. Now basically this is against the spirit of the constitution, or basically this is against the legal precedents that we have, where actually in the terms of the legal precedents you can see that ultimately the law, it says that you have to be presumed not guilty unless and until you had been convicted of any offence. And here it says that without any conviction, even without any conviction, the FCRA can be cancelled by the government. Now over here the critics say that this is highly susceptible to the misuse against the minority religious organizations which are there. Now there is a new exemption clause that had been added, very important, and it is 16L. Now over here the 16L or this exemption clause, it will let the government to exempt any class of the organization in the public interest as well. Now this is a discretionary carved out which actually the critics argue that they actually fail the Article 14 equality test. That is in the interest of the public interest. Alright, if you are exempting any of the organization or the NGOs, so ultimately that is where we do not have the right to equality, which is provided by Article 14, which says that everything, everybody, every organization is equal in the eyes of law. So actually it fails the equality test that is basically under Article 14 of the Constitution. Also when it comes to FCRA, remember that it was first enacted in 1976. That was an emergency era, and there was actually the fear that the foreign contribution or the foreign money, it could actually destabilize the Indian democracy. Now this was later on replaced by the FCRA or the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2010, which actually tightened the registration and barred the contribution to the political actors, to the media person, to the judges, and even the government servants as well. Now remember, when it comes to this amendment is basically not of the Parent Act or the amendment of the act that was originally passed in 1976. The Parent Act that we are talking about is the FCRA that was passed in 2010. So this is the Parent Act that will be amended by the bill that is being brought by the government. Alright, so this is quite important because ultimately when it comes to the clause 16A2. So in 16A2, it is about the organizations which are partly funded. All right. So this is ultimately when it comes to the partly funded organizations. So this is under the section 16A2 that this provision had been made, and the another provision that is basically something that is you can say the provision that is in the news, or basically that is a bone of contention, is the provision 16L, which is basically where the government can exempt any class of the NGOs on the basis of that this is in the interest of the public. All right, so these are the two clauses that you must remember when it comes to the complete amendment of the FCRA Act or the Foreign Contribution, the Amendment Act or the Foreign Contribution, Regulation Act of the 2010. Now, this is quite important because ultimately when it comes to the foreign contribution, they were never blanket prohibited in India, and they were only regulated with the progressively stricter conditions which are across the amendments that were made right from 1976 to 2010 and right now in 2026 as well. So there is no blanket ban on the foreign contribution, but actually they are basically regulated by the FCRA Act of 2010. Now, when it comes to 2010 Act, so already there is the provision of vesting of the FCRA funded assets in a prescribed authority under the special circumstances or the specific circumstances that are there. Now, there is already this provision then when it comes to the vesting of the FCRA funded assets, but at the same time when it comes to this law or the bill, that is 2026 bill, it actually widens this considerably, covering the complete domestic origin assets too, if partly it is being funded by the foreign contribution or the foreign funds. And that is why this is quite important, because earlier there were the clauses which were there, or there are already the provisions which are there under the 2010 Act, which actually provides for the vesting of the foreign contributed or the foreign funded assets. But now, along with the foreign funded assets, even the domestic funded assets, they will also be vested in the designated authority. Now, this designated authority is basically the body in which the cancelled or the surrendered FCRA assets, they will vest under the new bill, which may then actually transfer. It can also auction and sell them accordingly. So now this is when it comes to the complete provision over here. This is a debate that we are talking about between the civil society, the independence of the civil society or the autonomy, and also about the state which is actually moving towards, and this is not just about India. You can see the same global precedent that is there in Russia as well. In Russia also the foreign contribution had been, it is restricted. And in the same manner, we can see in the global regime as well, where the civil societies, they are basically being regulated, they are being restricted, and the level playing field or the level playing field for them, that is being constricted by the subsequent legislation and the laws globally as well. And that is why this is quite important news when it comes to the complete perspective. Coming to the next news, this is about the Theatre Command, and again this is quite important because this has been written by former Director Operational Logistics at the Army Headquarters, Harinder Singh, and this is again editorial that we are talking about. So this is about the Theatre Command, and ultimately over here when it comes to India, we are moving towards the theaterization. Now, theaterization is where actually we are merging the 17 single service commands into the 3 integrated theatre commands after the US, UK and China, which have already made this shift. Also, when it comes to the complete perspective, the Theatre Command will be commanded, or it will command the Army, Navy and Air Force assets directly or together, and ultimately even in the domains where they lack the career-long expertise as well. Now, there is basically a knowledge gap that will be created at the top during the transition that this particular article it talks about. Now, when it comes to the Theatre Command, it is very important that we have the Chief of Defence Staff, the post that was created in 2019. This was a post, it was created in 2019, and we have the Vice Chief of Defence Staff. So, this structure actually adds a coordination layer when it comes to the theaterization or the Theatre Command. But the Theatre Commanders, they actually report directly to the Raksha Mantri only once the fighting starts, but peacetime habits of the routing, it will be through the Vice Chief of Defence Staff that may persist under the pressure as well. Now, India is facing right now the two-front pressure that we always talk about when it comes to the security perspective of India, and we have the unresolved Chinese boundary, or we have the Chinese pressure, and even there is Pakistan rivalry, even as the reform is right now, it is underway, unlike that was there for China. So understand that when it comes to China, China have raised there were 5 commands or the theatre commands that were raised in 2016 in just a time period of 2 years. Or just in time periods of 2 years, China have raised 5 of the theatre commands. Or when it comes to US, so in US also there is Goldwater Nichols Act 1986. So over here there was a complete period of a decade. There was a complete period of decade, or you can say that in nearly about 10 years, there was the complete actualization of the theatre commands in US as well. And you can see that there was a direct, you can say, the test of the theatre command in US that was there in 1989. All right, we are talking about Panama crisis, and that was there in 1989, where it was tested just after the passage of the Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1986. So again, there was a breathing room. When it comes to US, when it comes to China, they had the breathing room for implementation of the theatre command or theaterization, but that same breathing room is not with India. So that is again quite important, and this is again very important that when it comes to the readiness, so the readiness had to be there and it has to be absorbed when there is the right kind of the environment basically which is present. Alright, now coming to the next important news that we have for today, it is India's refusal to uphold the global gig work law. Now this is quite important because there was the labor conference that was organized in Geneva. And in Geneva on 12th of June 2026, the International Labour Conference or the Labour Conference in Geneva, it had adopted the convention number 193, that is Decent Work in Platform Economy. That is the first binding ILO treaty or the International Labour Organization treaty for the gig and the platform workers, whether it is riders, drivers, the pickers, and even the data labelers as well. Now over here when it comes to India, so there was vote that was actually 406 in favor that have included China as well. It had included Brazil, Germany and France, even South Africa and Japan which voted in favor, and there were 8 which were actually against, and 36 of them they have abstained from the voting. Now India's government delegate abstained, though when it comes to India's employer and the workers delegates, they have both voted in the favor of this bill or the convention. So Indian government have abstained, but we had the employer and the worker delegates, they have voted in favor. Now when it comes to the ILO, please remember that in the terms of ILO, there is the voting basically which is tripartite voting. Tripartite voting means that there are the 3 of the delegates from all the countries. Alright, there are 3 delegates which are from a particular country, and these 3 delegates are where we have the government delegate, there is also the worker delegate, and even there is the employer delegate. So there are the 3 of the delegates which actually votes whenever there is a convention that have to be absorbed or it has to be adopted. So over here, the Indian delegate, the government delegate that have abstained from the voting, but when it comes to the worker and the employee, both of them, they have voted in the favor of the convention. Now this is quite important because all of them, that is all the 3 of the delegates, they can actually vote in favor or they can vote against or they can also abstain, and that is what the method of the voting that is there in the ILO or the International Labour Organization. Now this is again very important because this convention actually guarantees that there would be a floor rights that will be regardless of the platform's own classification of the workers. Whether the platform, it classifies the workers as the employees or even it can classify them as the independent partners, and ultimately there would be a floor of the rights that will be provided to these gig or the platform workers that will include the minimum pay, that will include the on-time payment, even the occupational safety and even the social security that is comparable to the similar placed workers which are there in the formal sectors. Now over here it also targets the algorithmic management for the first time as well. Now this is quite important because algorithmic management is basically where we have the platforms, alright, and these platforms are basically using this algorithmic management. So ultimately what happens is that there is a kind of when it comes to when you are going towards or you are booking a kind of ride on the Rapido or on the Ola or any of the rides. So there is the algorithmic management of the various gig workers which are there present in the vicinity, and then you are able to choose them on the purpose or on the way that how they are basically near to the location or how you are choosing them. So that is the algorithmic management, and this is the first time where it actually targets them, and it says that the platform must disclose the significant automated decision, like for example deactivation, and then explain them in writing and keep a human in the loop as well. Nothing, or the total platform, it should not be completely automated. Also over here, India have its own code on social security. Now this is as per 2020 where it was passed, and it is one of the 4 labor codes in force, that is since November 2025 when they were passed by the parliament. Now when it comes to India, so India is among the world's first where we have the central law that actually defined the gig worker and the platform workers as well. And also it directs that aggregators, they must pay 1 to 2% of the annual turnover, which is capped at 5% of the worker payouts into the social security fund. But the scheme is largely, it is unoperationalized right now in India. And that is again a concern when it comes to the gig workers or the platform workers as well. Now here we have the real regulatory movements which have so far has come from the states but not from the center. Like for example, we have in Rajasthan, we have the Platform Based Gig Workers Act 2023, and even the welfare boards which have been drafted in Karnataka and even in Telangana as well. Now India, when it comes to India, it is the founding member of the ILO and has ratified total 6 out of the 8 of the core ILO convention, but it has historically abstained on the conventions which have implicated the right to strike for the government workers or the government servants, that is number 87 or number 98 as well. So we have abstained in both of them, and also on the violence or harassment at the work, that is number 190, and we have ratified only once domestic law that is already in the full conformity that we have. So again, this is quite important because we have seen that in the prelims 2026, there were the questions that were asked related to the convention or the International Labour Convention, and that is why this complete article becomes quite important, where we are talking about convention number 193, that is about the gig and the platform workers. Now coming to the next news that we have, it is the private research and development spends crosses the government in the fiscal year or the financial year 2024. Now this is quite important because when it comes to the complete research and development spending, so there is GERD or the gross expenditure on the research and development that have crossed 0.8% of the GDP. And this was for the first time since 2009-2010, which have reached 0.83% in 2021-22 as per the recent data that had been released or disclosed by the government in Lok Sabha, by the reply that was given by the Department of Science and Technology. And this is the first time that we are talking about where the private industry, it had contributed more than the total research and development that was spent by the government at all levels combined, and the private research and development spend was 51.8% of the GERD, and this is up from 45.5% that was there in 2021-22. Now this is quite important when it comes to the GERD or the gross expenditure that is in the research and development. It have jumped from 1.27 lakh crore that was there in 2020-21 to 1.95 lakh crore rupees in 2021-22, and then it have jumped to 2.13 lakh crore rupees in 2022-23 and further to 2.45 lakh crore in 2023-24. And this is the total GERD, or you can say the gross expenditure that was done in the research and development field. Now this surge is basically not matched, very importantly, it was not matched by the commensurate rising in the government spend or the government's the agency budgets, which is basically the Department of Science and Technology, the DBT or the DAEA, even ISRO as well. So there was the budget that actually rose only incrementally, and ultimately the increase was driven by the private industry, where actually the research and development spend, it nearly doubled. It nearly doubled when it comes to the complete perspective from 2020-21, where it was just 46,400 crore rupees to in 2021-22 it rose to 88,600 crore rupees, and then in the 2023-24 you can see that it further to 1,26,800 crore rupees. Now, when it comes to research and development to the GDP ratio, so this had been the major concern, where actually we have lagged behind the major research economies which are there, despite that we have a large workforce when it comes to the research and development, and even we have the high global publication rankings, where you can see that ultimately we have just as per the GDP, we have the spending that is just 0.64% in 2020-21. As compared to the research and development spending that is there in China, which is 2.4%, in Japan it is 3.3%, in South Korea it is 4.8% of the GDP, and in US as well it is 3.5%, and for Israel it is nearly 5% per year, or for the same year that we are talking about. Now, this is quite important because ultimately there is the real regulatory movement so far that has come from the states, and that is for the gig workers. Now, over here you can see the complete perspective as we are talking about. So this is the metric that you can see, that when it comes to the GERD, or the gross expenditure on the research and development as percentage of GDP, it had been 0.83% in 2021-22. But at the same time, you can compare that for the Israel, it was nearly about 5%, for South Korea 4.8%, US it was 3.5%, and for China it was 2.4%. Even when it comes to private industry share in research and development, so actually rose to 23-24 to 51.8%. And at the same time, when it comes to the advanced industrial economies, you will see that their private spending in the research and development is quite high, which is more than 70%. And the GERD absolute quantum is 2.45 lakh crore rupees in 2023-24, where it had expanded from 1.27 crore or lakh crore rupees in 2020-21. Now, this is again quite important because there is, when it comes to the complete perspective, this data is collected by Department of Science and Technology, and it is basically NST-MIS. Now, NST-MIS is under the DST, or Department of Science and Technology, and it is basically the National Science and Technology Management Information System. All right, remember this. This is National Science and Tech, or Science and Technology Management Information System. Now, basically, this is the body, or you can say this is the organization which actually collects the data related to the research and development. And this had been in place since 1973. Please remember the year as well, that it is from the 1973 that all the data, or you can say the complete survey that had been conducted regarding the research and development, or the spending or the expenditure that is by the NST-MIS, or the National Science and Technology Management Information System, which is doing this right from 1973. And also 2023-24 is the first year where the private research and development expenditure, it have exceeded the total expenditure when it comes to the government as well. Also, moving towards the next news, let me tell you that we have over here the offer, that is Guru Kripa offer, where you are getting the 50% off along with the double validity and the mentorship by the rankers on the platform of StudyIQ, where you can enroll into the batch by using the code BRSLive. Now, over here, next comes the behind China's AI gift constraint. Now, again, this is quite important article because ultimately this talks about the AI push. Now, when it comes to the AI push, this article is about the 9th World AI Conference that was held in Shanghai, where Chinese President Xi Jinping, he actually pitched about the Chinese AI models. Now, these Chinese AI models, he have said that they are basically the global public good, contrasting the open weight approach with the closed approach, that is basically the US model that we are talking about, where we have Anthropic, we have OpenAI, and the Google as well. So basically, this is about two different types of approach when it comes to AI. We have two approach, that is we have open weight and we have the closed weighted models. Now, what is the difference between both of them? How we differentiate between the open weighted and the closed weighted models? So please remember, when it comes to the open weighted, all right, or open weight models, so basically the open weight models are those Alright, you can say that these are those models about which we have the complete data that is available publicly. Or you can say publicly you can download the parameters which are there. So we have publicly available data or publicly downloadable data and parameters. They exist and they are the open weight models when it comes to the AI. But when it comes to a closed model or closed weighted, so closed weighted models are basically those models where we do not have the public downloadable data. And for using these, for using the closed weighted models, we actually require APIs. Alright, so we have to pay. We have to pay APIs for getting the access to these models, and that is what we are talking about. When it comes to the US models, they are basically the closed weighted models where you actually have to pay. If you are using Anthropic, you have to pay. If you are using Gemini, you have to pay. If you are using any of although when it comes to ChatGPT or the OpenAI, it is right now free, but at the same time, that is only for a certain period of time. Then again, you have to pay. So these models, when it comes to the US models, basically they actually use the closed system or closed weighted system or the approach where actually you have to pay in the API for the APIs, and then only you can go and you can actually use those models. But when it comes to the Chinese models, so Xi Jinping have said that basically they are the open models or open weighted models as compared to the US models which are there. Now when it comes to the Chinese lab, we have the DeepSeek, we have the Quen, the Moonshot as well. The release models have been weighted openly, which actually allows any country, even the one without the large compute resources, to download, customize and run these models locally without US style API dependency that is basically there for the closed weighted models. Now again, this is quite important because ultimately when it comes to the complete perspective, you can see that over here this article argues that the openness is basically driven as much as by a structural compute constraint. Like for example, the US export controls limits the Chinese access to the advanced chips as compared to the genuine diplomatic generosity that you can see. Even when it comes to the China, it can actually accumulate enough chips that are there in the thousands to train a frontier model through the stockpiling or the smuggling, but at the same time lacks the far larger inference fleet in the hundreds of thousands to cover 1 million GPUs, which are basically needed to serve that model to a mass global user base at the scale. So when it comes to open weighting, the model outsources the serving cost to the user's own local servers, and that is the reason why actually China is basically moving towards the open weighted models, because actually it does not have that much of computing power, it does not have the local servers or the servers which are basically that much large enough that could be located in China. And since 2022, we can see that the US and the allies, they have restricted China's ability to import or to manufacture advanced chips. Like for example, the EUV lithography tools, which have constrained China's semiconductor fabrication capability. And we have the SMIC, which have 5 nanometer line that actually runs at only nearly about 20% yield without the EUV tools. And that is major constraint when it comes to the open model, and why the China is pushing its open model as the global models that could be used or utilized. Now when it comes to training and AI, when it comes to the AI or the large language models that we are talking about, so there is the data set that is required. We can train the AI on the data sets, and training an AI that could be one time, it could be about the chip cluster intensive as well. And this is again fundamentally different from the task that is about serving or inference as well. Now this is different, both of them, the training and serving and inference is different, because serving and inference is where actually there is continuous and there is continuous training, and it actually scales with the user base as well. Now when it comes to training the AI or the serving the AI or the inference, basically there are the export controls. They have effectively blocked China's ability to scale the inference capability or the capacity, because there had been the export level blocks, and ultimately here the China is moving towards through the training level parity only. It does not have the serving or the inference capability or the capacity because of the bans or the export controls. Now when it comes to DeepSeek, you can see that it froze the new registrations in January 2025 after a traffic surge, and it could not actually serve. And this is the evidence that you can see for the underlying capacity concerns and why the China is saying that it has the open weighted models. The major reason is that it does not have the computational ability for the serving or the inference models, and also it does not have the capability for hosting large number of the servers in China that could actually have a large traffic surge that could be handled by China. And that is one of the reason why the China is saying that it is moving towards the open weighted models. Now coming to the next one, it is about the US, which have fast-tracked the act for the 100% tariff for the trade as well. Now this is quite important because ultimately when it comes to US, the Senate have voted 86-12 for invoking the cloture. That is basically the fast track of the debate on the Lindsey Graham sanctioning or the bill sanctioning the Russia and the Iran Act of 2026. Now over here, this is basically a bill that will impose or that could impose a tariff that is up to 100% on the countries which are importing oil from the Russia. Now when it comes to the original version of this Graham bill or the Graham Act that was introduced in US, it actually proposed a blanket of 500% tariff on the Russian oil importers, and it was revised downgraded to up to 100% in July 2026. Now over here, this is again quite important because India is among the top 5 purchasers of the Russian crude oil and gas as well. Now over here, the China, it actually accounts for, or China is the largest trader when it comes to Russian oil because it is importing 45 to 50% of the Russian crude exports, and India is exporting nearly about 36 to 38%, which actually means that India is the second largest buyer of the Russian oil right now, and it would be directly impacted and heavily imposed if the act it actually passes. Now India's Russian oil share in the total oil imports, you can see that it rose from just over 40% in May 2026 to more than half or more than 50% that we are talking about in June 2026 as per the data that had been released by Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, which actually raises the India's exposure at exactly the same moment when this act actually advances. Now when it comes to the cloture vote, this is basically, please remember what it is. So it is just a procedural device which actually limits the debate time and force the vote on the bill, and its passage, that is 86-12, it is basically not about the passage of this bill. This bill has not yet even passed, but again this signals the strong bipartisan momentum that is there, and although the bill itself still needs the full passage and the presidential assent also to become the law, but at the same time we can compare this that ultimately this could have a very huge impact on the economic scenario when it comes to India and US trade ties. Alright, this is also important because the act have stated the aim is to curb the Russia's war financing capacity, where President Putin's revenue is being generated for the Ukraine war by pressurizing the world's largest purchases of the Russian energy to reduce the dependence on the Moscow. Now over here, I have a question, and that question is that why only the crude oil and why not the natural gas? Alright, now this is where the bill becomes discriminatory because ultimately when it comes to crude oil, alright, Russia is exporting the crude oil, and we have seen that China and India, they are the top buyers or they are the major buyers. At the same time, when it comes to natural gas, Russia also exports natural gas. And natural gas is basically where you will see that the major exporters are the European countries. There are European countries which actually imports the natural gas, and that is for warming up their homes. During the winters, where actually the natural gas is majorly utilized from the Russia. Now, this is where this bill becomes or this act becomes discriminatory, because why you are discriminating between the India or the Russia, India and China, as compared to the European nations. So there must be the similar tariff that must be imposed to the European nation as well, which are importing a bulk of the natural gas from Russia. But that was actually not proposed by US, and that is where you can see that this is discrimination or discriminatory act that is over here. Now, India had defended the discounted Russian crude oil purchases after the 2022, and after the Western nations, they have largely stopped buying as well, as key to containing the import bill, supporting energy security, and even curbing the inflation. So again, this is where actually the India's strategic autonomy, it is being tested, and let's see what India will do if this bill will be passed or this act will be passed by the US Senate, and it will approve or it will get the approval of the US President. Now, coming to the next news is about India getting ready for Xi and Putin visit in September. Now, there is the BRICS summit that will be organized in India. India is right now the chair of the BRICS, and this summit will be organized from or on 12 and 13 of September 2026. So we are preparing to host the BRICS summit in Delhi in September 2026, and ultimately we will have both the Chinese President Xi Jinping and even the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who are expected to attend the BRICS summit. Now, sources say that the consultation for these high-level visits, they are right now ongoing. We have Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri, who have held the talks in Beijing this week with the senior Communist Party of China official Sun Haiyan, focused on the strengthening of the high-level interactions and even managing the differences to sustain the recent improvement in the bilateral ties. So we know that when it comes to India and China, the ties they have strained after the Galwan skirmishes that happened. And ultimately afterwards, what happened was that in 2023, China, the Jinping and Prime Minister Modi, they met, and ultimately that led to the restoration of the ties between India and China, and that is what we are looking forward to. Now, it actually did not attend the 2025 BRICS summit that was organized in Brazil, where it had deputed the Premier Xi Jinping instead of the Xi Jinping. All right, but he actually attended the previous summit that were organized in South Africa in 2023, in Russia as well in 2024 as well, and the later which actually paved for the India-China's gradual normalizations of the relations, which were after the 2022-20 border standoff, or you can say the Galwan standoff that was there. Now here it is quite important that Russia has separately signaled the support for India's BRICS chairmanship, and even the China have reiterated its support for the summit during the Misri's Beijing visit, both suggesting that there could be positive momentum for the high-profile attendance or both the China and even when it comes to the Russia, both the president, they may attend the BRICS summit that will be organized in India. Now, ultimately, when it comes to the gradual normalization process, so that was from 23 onwards, following the Galwan border standoff that was between India and China. Now, this was aided by Modi-Xi engagements that were there in South Africa in 2023 and later on in Russia as well during the BRICS summit. Now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he have visited Delhi in May 2026 for the BRICS Foreign Ministers meeting as well. And here there were the highest level contacts that were between Putin and Modi, they were discussed, and this is the early sign that the Putin, he may visit the summit in September 2026. Alright, there's another news that you can see. Again, this is not that much important, but again, it can be asked about in the prelims or in your one-day examination, and that is where we have unveiled the first Department of Military Medicine in Lucknow, or the Command Hospital that is located in Lucknow. Now, coming to the questions that could be asked from today's newspaper. Alright, so these are the important questions that you can prepare for your prelims 2027. The first one is, with reference to the Environmental Impact Assessment or EIA and the administrative law in India, consider the following statements. First, an OM or Office Memorandum issued by the Union Ministry can amend the provision of the statutory notification promulgated under Section 3 of the Environmental Protection Act 1986. The second one is, the precautionary principle requires environmental impact evaluations to be conducted prior to project implementation. And the third one is that the Supreme Court of India can invoke plenary powers under Article 142 to protect the public infrastructure projects even when an underlying executive memorandum is invalidated. So which of the statements given above is correct? Now over here, when it comes to the first one, we know that this is incorrect as been said by the Supreme Court recently, but the second and third are right. So thereby the answer will be B, that is 2 and 3 only. Alright, next one is consider the following statements regarding the Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Amendment Act or Bill 2026. First, it establishes a statutory timeline requiring the investigations into paper leaks to be completed within 2 months. It reduces the maximum period of service provider debarment from 8 to 4 years, and then it authorizes state governments to designate existing sessions court as the fast track special courts as well. So what will be the correct answer here for this one? Once again, over here, when it comes to the second statement, it does not reduce but increases from 8 to 12 years, and that is why the second statement is incorrect. We have 1 and 3 which are true, and thereby the answer will be B, that is 1 and 3 only. Now coming to the next one, we have regarding the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act FCRA framework in India, consider the following statements. The first one is candidates for election, judges and members of the legislature are legally prohibited from receiving foreign contributions. Second, assets created partially through the foreign contributions vest provisionally with a designated authority if an organization registration certificate is cancelled. Then clause 16L of the FCRA Bill 2026 mandates that exempted organizations must be listed in the 9th schedule of the Constitution. So, which of the statement given above is correct once again? So, once again over here, when it comes to clause 16L of the FCRA. So, what is this clause 16L of the FCRA? It is basically about exemption of the NGOs or exemption of the civil society organizations on the basis of or in the matters of the public interest, and that is why the third is incorrect, but we have first and second which are correct, and thereby the answer is A, that is 1 and 2 only. Next one is consider the following statements regarding the national research and development expenditure trends in India. First one is GERD as a percentage of GDP exceeded 2.0 in the fiscal year or financial year of 2021-22. Second, private sector industry contribution accounted for more than 50% of total research and development expenditure in 2023-24, and the National Science and Technology Management Information System or NST-MIS operates under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So, which of the statements given above is correct? So, over here, once again, when it comes to the first one, it is incorrect because when it comes to the GERD as a percent of GDP, it has crossed 0.8%, not 2.0%. And the third one is also incorrect because it is under the, it operates under the Department of Space and Technology. So, the third one is also incorrect. We have the second that is correct, and that will be the right one. Now coming to the next one, with reference to the ILO Convention number 193, you have to consider the following statements. We have the 3 statements. The first one is it is legally binding international treaty specifically addressing the platform and gig worker protections. Second, it requires member states to regulate the algorithmic management system including automated work allocation and the account deactivation. And India ratified Convention number 193 during the International Labour Conference in Geneva. So, write down your answer in the comment, and also we have the next question, that is consider the following statements regarding E20 fuel blending in India. E20 fuel consists of 20% ethanol and 80% petrol by volume. Then anhydrous ethanol has a higher calorific value or the energy density than the pure motor spirit of petrol, resulting in increased fuel mileage. Then ethanol is hygroscopic and can cause the corrosion in the elastomer or the rubber gaskets and aluminium parts of legacy non-compliant engines. So, which of the statement given above is correct? Again, write down the answer in the comment as well. And then we have the seventh question, that is consider the following statements regarding higher defense organization reforms in India. The first one, in India currently operates 17 single service operational commands alongside 2 functional tri-service commands. The Andaman and Nicobar Command ANC is India's first operational tri-service command, and then integrated theatre commands place all Army, Navy and Air Force assets under the operational control of individual service headquarters in New Delhi. So, again, write down the answer in the comment box as well. Now, these are the two questions that you can practice for your mains examination. The first one is the practice of issuing ex post facto environmental clearances undermines the precautionary principle and turns environmental governance into a routine administrative formality. Now, critically analyze the statement in the light of the Supreme Court's recent judgment quashing the 2021 memorandum. And then second one is examine how the expansion of US secondary sanctions and targeted tariff legislations impacts India's strategic autonomy and energy security. How should India navigate its multi-aligned foreign policy amidst growing economic coercion by the major powers? So these are the questions that you can try for your mains examination. Now, going through today's The Hindu, you can see that these are the important things that you can remember for your prelims perspective. The first one is that the Supreme Court have quashed the 2021 OM on the ex post facto environmental clearances, and this is prospectively, not retrospectively. Again, very important. Then the second one is that Article 142, it still allows the Supreme Court itself to grant the ex post facto environmental clearances in the exceptional cases. The third one is that the FCRA Amendment 2026, it allows the vesting of the entire asset even if it is partly funded by the foreign contribution. Then the Kaveri Water Management or the Regulation Committee have directed the Karnataka to release the total of 3,500 cusecs per day to Tamil Nadu for the next 15 days. And when it comes to the Tri-Service Command, so we have only the fully functional Tri-Service Command that actually remains at the ANC or the Andaman and Nicobar since 2001. Along with this, you must remember these also, that is that India have abstained from the ILO Convention 193 that is on the platform and the gig workers, which had been adopted by the voting that had been 406 in favor, 8 against, and there were 36 abstentions that were there. And ultimately, over here, we do have our own worker and the employee delegates which have voted yes as well. Now, when it comes to India, we have ratified the 6 out of the 8 ILO core conventions which are there. And over here, we have these conventions, that is C or the Convention 87, 98 and 190, which actually remains unratified by India. Now, when it comes to China's, so China have the open weight AI strategy, which is shaped as much as US chip or the EUV export controls as by the diplomatic messaging that we can see. And then when it comes to Public Examination Prevention of Unfair Means Act 2024, so this has secured the 0 convictions when it comes to the 2 years, despite that there had been nearly about 52 FIRs which had been filed since 2024. And then the BRICS Summit will be held from 12 to 13 September in 2026, and it will be hosted by India in New Delhi, where we are expecting that the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping and the President of Russia, that is Vladimir Putin, they may actually attend. So ultimately, that would be all in today's session or the complete Hindu analysis. But at the same time, let me tell you that we are offering you with a Guru Kripa offer, where you are getting 50% off and also the double validity along with the mentorship that will be provided by the rankers. Now, this is quite important that you can enroll into these GS Foundation batch. We have the evening and the English batch for the P2I. That is Resolution P2I batch, where actually we prepare you right from your preparation to your interview. We give you a proper guidance right through the NCRT foundations, through your prelims preparation, then moving towards your mains and towards your interview as well. So you get the proper structured classes, you get the mentorship, the assessment, the revision and the test series as well. That is, the complete structure is based upon the SMART model. So you can enroll into the batch by using the code BRS Live, that which actually fetch you the maximum discount, that is 50% off, along with double validity, along with the mentorship that will be provided by the rankers. So that would be all in today's session. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me over here on the platform of StudyIQ. I will see you in the next, that is tomorrow at the same time at 9:30 a.m. for the next analysis. So that would be all, but do not forget to like the session, to share the session with your friends, and also do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed it yet. So that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.